The first time Nora saw him, she nearly missed him entirely. He was tucked into the farthest corner of room 209, half lost beneath the clean hospital linens, a shadowed figure whose presence barely registered against the hum of the monitors and scent of antiseptic. A cold snap had swept through the state in late October, ushering in the season's first cluster of respiratory illnesses. He came in late one night, driven in by a private ambulance, barely speaking, refusing to give his name. Just another pneumonia case, Nora thought. Quiet, withdrawn, likely just wanted to be left alone. That suited her fine. She learned not to take silence personally. Some patients came in like open books, telling stories from their hospital beds as if it helped them forget why they were there. Others, like him, folded in on themselves like crumpled paper, hard to reach. She was used to both. What she wasn't used to was the strange stillness that clung to him, not just physical but atmospheric. He looked youngish, maybe late 30s, but his face was pale, hollowed, eyes bruised with exhaustion. There was a heaviness in his gaze, as though the weight of some invisible thing had finally brought him to the ground. "Mr. Wallace," she said softly, confirming the name he'd finally given, "how are you feeling today?" He didn't answer. His eyes shifted briefly toward her before closing again. Nora checked his vitals with practiced efficiency. Fever still running high, oxygen saturation stable for now. She adjusted his nasal cannula, her gloved fingers brushing lightly against the curve of his jaw. He flinched, not dramatically, just enough that she noticed. She didn't react, didn't comment. Instead, she straightened the blanket at his feet, gentle but firm. "You should try the broth," she said, placing the untouched tray on the bedside table. "It's warm, it might help." Still nothing. She left the room without expecting gratitude. Back at the nurse's station, her colleague Amelia raised an eyebrow. Room 209 still playing dead. Nora shook her head, sipping from a lukewarm cup of tea. "He's not playing, he's just somewhere else right now." Amelia leaned in. "Did you hear how he checked in? No ID, no next of kin. He paid up front cash, no questions. Fancy coat though, real wool." Nora frowned. She hadn't noticed. She rarely paid attention to those things. Probably someone who doesn't want to be found. Amelia lowered her voice. "Or someone worth finding." Nora didn't indulge the speculation. Gossip always traveled faster in hospitals, and most of it turned out hollow. She focused on the work. Shifts blurred together like watercolor on damp paper, days dissolving into each other. Yet every day Nora checked in on him, not because she was curious, not at first. It was just duty, compassion, habit. And then he started to shift. It was small at first. He accepted the broth. Then the tea. One day she found the crossword in the newspaper half filled out, his penmanship sharp and elegant. She smiled but said nothing. Another day he asked in a voice rough as gravel, "What time is it?" His voice startled her. She paused. "A little past 2." He nodded and closed his eyes again. His chart revealed no name beyond Wallace, no insurance beyond a suspiciously perfect self-pay arrangement. There was nothing remarkable about his labs or scans, but Nora began to notice the details he left behind. Books with the covers carefully turned down, notes scribbled in the margins of a legal pad in shorthand, a worn leather journal tucked under the blanket, never far from reach. He didn't want company, but he tolerated hers. That was enough. One afternoon, as she adjusted his IV, he said quietly, "Do you ever get tired of seeing people suffer?" The question caught her off guard. She looked down at his hand, pale against the white of the sheets. "Yes," she said, "but not enough to stop." He didn't respond, but his mouth twitched slightly. Not quite a smile, not quite nothing either. She sat beside his bed for a few minutes longer than usual that day, pretending to check his chart. She felt the hush between them soften, not break, but soften. A week passed, then another. His fever faded. His strength returned in inches. Still, he didn't ask to leave. He remained in that sterile room with the blinds half closed and the world outside moving on without him. Nora didn't question it. She brought him books one day, some from the hospital library, one of her own favorites. He took them with a glance that lingered a second longer than usual. Later that night, she found a sticky note pressed onto the inside cover of her book. "Beautiful prose, thank you." The handwriting was neat, exact, familiar somehow. She traced her finger over the note before slipping it into her pocket. It was Amelia who brought the whispers back to life. "You're not going to believe this," she said one morning, sliding her phone across the counter. "He's not Mr. Wallace, he's Elliot Keaton." Nora stared at the image on the screen. A man in a tailored suit standing beside a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a children's hospital, the same haunted eyes, the same mouth. "He owns half the damn state," Amelia said, breathless. "Tech empire, real estate, philanthropy out the ears. He disappeared a month ago. His board said he was on medical leave. That's code for meltdown. Nora pushed the phone back toward her. I don't care, she said. But something in her stomach had twisted. She had taken care of a man without knowing his name, and now it was everywhere. Elliot Keaton, reclusive billionaire, the man who vanished. She walked into room 209 that afternoon with the knowledge like a stone in her pocket. He was sitting up, book open on his lap. He looked healthier, still quiet but no longer fragile. Their eyes met. He saw it in her instantly. You know. Nora nodded. He closed the book. I didn't want to be anyone here, he said. I needed, he trailed off, time. You got it, she said. She didn't mention the fortune, the board, the missing headlines. She sat beside his bed as she always did, folding his vitals into her chart, steady and calm. When he reached for his tea, she handed it to him without a word. In that small, quiet act, something shifted between them. Not gratitude. Not awe. Something closer to trust. The snow had started to fall by the time Elliot took his first step outside room 209. He moved slowly with the careful deliberation of someone rediscovering motion after too much stillness. Nora watched him from behind the nurse's desk, not making a show of it but not looking away either. He wore a gray sweater someone had dropped off from Lost and Found, its sleeves a little too long, the collar slouching on one side. His hair had grown uneven during his stay, curling at the back in a way that made him look younger, undone, more human. He walked the hall with a quiet reverence, pausing by the window at the end to look out at the snowfall. Nora returned to updating charts, heart pulling toward the moment like a thread caught on a nail. Later, he sat in the empty patient lounge, reading. She brought him coffee, just black, the way he'd taken it once from a forgotten hospital tray. He looked up. I was wondering when someone would find me. Didn't think to leave a note. I like to keep expectations low. She smiled faintly, lowering herself into the chair across from him. They sat in silence for a moment before he spoke again. I wasn't planning to stay this long. You didn't plan much of it, I gather. No, he said, eyes focused on the snow. I had a panic attack in a board meeting, couldn't breathe, drove until I hit rain then ice, ended up here. People don't usually pay cash to end up in our hospital. His mouth quirked. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just wanted somewhere no one knew me, somewhere small I didn't expect. He looked at her then. You. The snow fell heavier outside the window. He stayed another week, though nothing in his charts required it. Nora noticed how he waited until her shift began before emerging from his room, how he lingered near the nurse's station pretending to read pamphlets he never took with him. She caught him watching her hands once as she threaded a fresh IV into an elderly woman's wrist, not in a way that felt intrusive, just observant, as if something about the care itself moved him. And she started to notice things too. He wrote in his journal every morning, always starting on the left page, ending on the right, a kind of symmetry in his thoughts. He paced when he was restless but never aimlessly. He listened closely when people spoke, head tilted slightly, like he was storing everything away. One afternoon, he stopped her in the hallway. I don't know how to say thank you in a way that doesn't feel transactional. Then don't, she replied. You got sick, I did my job. His gaze held hers. It wasn't just a job, not with you. That night when she left the hospital, she found a paper bag waiting in the staff locker room with her name written on the front. Inside was a copy of a poetry collection she'd once mentioned she loved, out of print for years, the cover worn soft with age. Tucked inside was a note on crisp white stationery. You listened without needing to know everything, thank you for that. E. The next morning he was gone. No formal discharge, no goodbyes. Just an empty room, the blankets folded neatly, the water glass emptied, as if he had never been there at all. Days passed, then weeks. Nora tried to let it go. People came and went. Lives unraveled and restitched themselves within these sterile walls every day. And yet a quiet echo lingered in room 209, in the lounge, in the hollow between a question and its answer. By late December, the snow had crusted into ice. Her shift ended past midnight and the sky was bone white above the parking lot. She turned the ignition in her car, waiting for the defroster to groan awake when a knock at the window startled her. She looked up. Elliot stood there, breath rising in clouds, cheeks red with cold. She lowered the window halfway. You're not dying again, are you? He exhaled, his laugh a burst of steam in the air. Not today. What are you doing here? I came to return something. She frowned. My name, he said simply. She blinked. I don't want it to be a secret between us, not anymore. She hesitated before opening the door. The cold wrapped around her, sharp and unforgiving. He stepped back to give her space. You could have called, she said. I don't have your number. That's because I didn't give it to you. I figured that was deliberate. She crossed her arms. You don't need to be here, Elliot. I know, he said, but I wanted to be. She looked at him closely, the familiar tiredness still there but softer at the edges now. Something about him had settled, or maybe just shifted. I kept thinking about the way you sat next to me, not because you had to, but because you chose to. I didn't know what to do with that. And now, I'm still figuring it out. She tilted her head. This isn't a fairy tale. I'm not asking for one. What are you asking for? He looked away briefly, then back. A beginning, if you want one too. Nora thought of the hundreds of patients she'd seen, the stories that passed through her like weather. She thought of the silence in room 209, of his careful questions, of the book with her name in it, of how somehow this had become more than just a job. I'm off in an hour tomorrow, she said. His breath hitched. And coffee. She nodded. Coffee. He smiled, not the sharp, polished smile of a man who could buy and sell cities, but something quieter, earned. He turned, hands shoved in his coat pockets, and walked back toward a dark sedan parked at the edge of the lot. Nora watched him go, a warmth settling beneath her ribs. She didn't know what would come next. But for the first time in a long while, she wanted to find out. They met at a corner cafe the next day, quiet, nondescript, the kind of place no one photographed their lattes. Nora arrived first, choosing a seat by the window, the winter sun a pale disk behind thin glass. She wore her thick navy coat and a scarf that still smelled faintly of antiseptic from last night's shift. She didn't dress up. She didn't know how to, not for this. Elliot arrived 5 minutes late. She knew it was deliberate, not late enough to seem careless, just enough to signal uncertainty. He carried a small bag with 2 books peeking out the top. One was poetry, the other she recognized from the hospital lounge. He sat down across from her, folding his hands on the table like he wasn't sure what to do with them. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. I wasn't sure you'd show up twice. That earned a small smile. He looked different in the daylight, less faded, more real. The kind of real that carries the shape of a life, not just a shadow of it. They ordered coffee, and for a few minutes they talked like strangers who almost were. He asked about the night shift. She asked if he was sleeping better. He nodded. Being out of the hospital helps, he said. You're not going back to work yet. He shook his head. I'm not sure I am going back. Nora blinked. You mean at all? I spent 10 years building something I thought would make me feel safe, he said, eyes on his cup. It didn't, and then when I was finally still, when I let it all go, I didn't miss it like I thought I would. I missed other things. Like what? He looked at her, then his gaze steady. Peace, people who see me, not the version of me they can use, rooms that don't talk back, silence that isn't empty. The honesty in his voice startled her. Not rehearsed, not guarded, just raw, simple truth. She stirred her coffee slowly. You know that the quiet doesn't stay quiet forever. I know. And if you're chasing something soft, it won't hold unless you do. He considered that, then nodded. That's fair. They talked longer than she expected, about books, long winters, what it meant to start over. She told him about her mother, who used to read to her in the waiting room while they sat through her father's dialysis. About the moment she knew she'd become a nurse, not a grand revelation, just a quiet, growing certainty that she belonged close to other people's pain, not away from it. He listened the same way he had in room 209, intently, without interruption, as though her words mattered more than whatever he was about to say next. When she stood to leave, he did too. Can I walk you to your car? She hesitated, then nodded. The sidewalk was icy. He offered his arm, but she declined with a quiet laugh, balancing carefully on her boots. They reached her car, breath visible in the air between them. I'd like to see you again, he said, voice low. I know. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. They met once a week after that, always somewhere quiet, sometimes a walk, sometimes a bench by the river wrapped in coats and stillness. He spoke more as the weeks passed, but not always about himself. He asked about her favorite season, about the hardest day she could remember, about what she would have been if she weren't a nurse. A lighthouse keeper, she said once, only half joking. He smiled at that. That makes sense. Why? You already know how to stand still while the storm passes. The words nestled under her ribs. By late January, something unspoken had started to live in the air between them, not quite a relationship, not quite a friendship, something tender forming its shape slowly, respectfully. One day, as they sat in her living room, tea growing cold between them, he said, "Can I ask you something personal?" She looked at him. "You can ask. Why are you alone?" It wasn't cruel, just curious. She looked down at her hands. "I was engaged once. He was kind, safe, but it wasn't love, not the kind that holds." "What kind holds?" She looked at him, her voice soft. "The kind that lets you be small sometimes, the kind that stays when the silence gets heavy." He said nothing, but his eyes shone. "I don't mind being alone," she added, "but sometimes I miss having someone to come home to, just that." He reached out slowly, placing his hand over hers. "I've never had that," he said. She didn't pull away. In the weeks that followed, they learned the quiet shape of each other's lives. She introduced him to her neighbor's golden retriever who insisted on loving strangers. He showed her the field where he used to run as a child, long since sold off to developers. She told him about the night her father passed, how she stood in the hallway, pressing her hand to the wall, needing to feel something solid. He listened like he was holding every word gently in his palms. One evening, while she folded laundry, he cooked. It wasn't much, just pasta and vegetables, but the kitchen smelled warm and her apartment felt full in a way it hadn't in years. She watched him slice garlic, sleeves rolled, expression focused. "You don't strike me as a man who cooks often," she said. "I don't, but I like the way it makes a room feel." When dinner was done, they ate at her tiny table, knives brushing beneath. Afterward, he didn't rush to leave. He helped dry dishes, and when the last cup was in the cabinet, he turned to her and said, "Can I stay a little longer?" She nodded. They sat on the couch, neither reaching for the other, neither pulling away, just there, present, breathing. When he leaned his head back, she rested hers against his shoulder, and for the first time he closed his eyes and didn't flinch. Not from touch, not from the past. From nothing at all. Spring arrived slow and stubborn that year, as if unsure it was welcome. In early March, snow still laced the edges of the sidewalks, but crocuses had started to bloom in crooked clusters near the hospital fence. Nora noticed them one morning as she stepped out after a long shift, petals half folded, their purple mouths stretching toward a reluctant sun. She stood there for a moment, letting the cold air cut through the haze of her exhaustion. In her coat pocket, her phone buzzed. "Coffee? I'll bring the good kind this time. E." She smiled, thumb hovering for only a moment before she wrote back. "Only if you bring the lemon biscotti too." He was waiting outside her apartment an hour later, leaning against the hood of a car that didn't belong in this neighborhood. He looked less like the man who had arrived at her hospital with pneumonia and more like someone learning how to stand in his own skin again. Still quiet, still careful, but with color in his face and purpose in his movements. "I'm starting to think you only see me for baked goods," he said as she stepped outside. "That's a dangerous assumption to make," she replied, plucking the paper bag from his hand. "I might also like your company." He grinned, rare and open. They walked to the park nearby, found a bench with a patch of sunlight and sat close without needing to explain why. Children tumbled across the playground. A woman jogged past with a golden retriever who barked once in greeting. Elliot passed her a cup. "You ever think about leaving?" "Leaving what?" "This town, the job, starting over somewhere new." Nora shrugged. "I've thought about it, but I don't think peace is in a place for me. It's in the people." He looked at her then, quiet in the way people are when they're weighing their own truths. "I got a call from the board," he said. She nodded, waiting. "They want me back, they say it's time." "Is it?" "I don't know." She sipped her coffee. "What do you want?" He hesitated. "I want a life that doesn't cost me myself." She didn't ask what that looked like. She just reached over and took his hand. Later, back at her apartment, he lingered in the doorway. "I've never done this slowly before," he said. "What?" "Falling for someone." Her breath caught. "I was always all or nothing, but with you it's like I'm walking across a bridge I didn't know was there, one step at a time." She looked up at him, her voice quiet. "You're not alone on it." He kissed her then, soft and steady, like he'd been waiting not for permission, but for the right moment. And when they parted, she rested her forehead against his. "I don't need you to become someone else," she whispered. "I don't want to," he said. Weeks passed and they fell into a rhythm, two lives that had once run parallel, now folding gently toward one another. He started volunteering at a local shelter, preferring quiet logistics to public praise. She moved through her shifts with a new lightness, though she still stayed late, still bent over bedsides whispering reassurance to people who would never remember her name. They didn't rush anything. There was no declaration, no candlelit milestone, just shared dinners, stolen mornings, books exchanged without fanfare, each page slowly marking the territory of something lasting. One day she found him on her couch, reading the poetry collection he'd once returned to her. A slip of paper had fallen out. Her name was written on it in his hand, beside a line underlined twice. "And when I could not speak, your silence answered me." She stood there for a long moment, watching him, heart swelling with something she didn't yet know how to say. Then came the call. She was halfway through her shift when Amelia waved her over with a strange look. "There's someone on the line for you," she said, "from Keaton Holdings." Nora frowned, wiping her hands on her scrubs. Why would they?" She picked up the phone. "Miss Brennan," said a crisp voice, "I'm calling on behalf of the Keaton Family Trust. Mr. Elliot Keaton has submitted paperwork designating you as a primary contact in several medical and legal documents. We just need to confirm." She interrupted, confused. "Wait, what are you talking about?" A pause. I thought you'd know. Mr. Keaton underwent an emergency procedure this morning. He collapsed during a site visit. He's stable now, but there were complications. He's asking for you." The room blurred around her. She left without finishing her shift, coat still damp from the snow melting outside. The hospital Elliot had been transferred to was upscale, quiet, the kind of place with too much glass and not enough warmth. She found him in a private recovery room hooked to monitors again, tubes in his arm, pale still. But his eyes opened when she stepped inside. "You came," he rasped. She rushed to his side, voice thick. "Of course I did." He tried to smile, wasn't trying to be dramatic. "You failed," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "They said it was my heart, nothing big, just tired, like the rest of me." She lined in, voice trembling. "Don't you dare scare me like that again." "I promise I'll try not to," he said. His fingers found hers. And in the hush of that sterile room, it was as if room 209 had never ended. It had only widened, opened into something deeper. And the heart between them, tired or not, was still beating. Elliot stayed in the hospital for 3 days. It wasn't as long as Nora feared, but just long enough to strip away whatever illusion remained that their lives were untouched by each other. She stayed by his side through most of it, taking time off without being asked. She answered questions from doctors, filled out his meal preferences when he couldn't be bothered, helped him shave when the stubble started to itch. At one point, as she gently eased a warm cloth along his jaw, he looked at her with a kind of wonder she hadn't seen before. "You know, I used to think love was a risk I couldn't afford," he murmured. She rinsed the cloth, and now I think it's the only thing I've ever wanted that wasn't trying to take something from me." He was released on a rainy afternoon. Nora drove him home, his home, the one he'd never shown her, not until now. It wasn't the glass-walled estate the magazines had published photos of years ago. This one was tucked into a grove of old trees outside the city, with stone steps and a porch that creaked underfoot. It looked like it had been waiting for someone to come back. He let her in, keys jingling in his hand, shoulders tense. "I bought it 5 years ago, never told anyone. I'd come here when the world got too loud, but I never stayed long enough for it to feel like mine." She stepped over the threshold and looked around. Bookshelves lined the walls, half filled. The fireplace was clean but unused. The couch had a dent on one side, as though someone had sat there too often but never settled. "You could live here," she said softly. He looked at her, "Not without you." The words landed without drama, just truth. She turned, stepping closer. "I'm not someone you need to rescue. I have a life, a small one, but it's mine." "I know, and I won't be part of a fairy tale ending." His voice was steady. "I'm not asking for a fairy tale. I'm asking if we can build something that lasts." Nora looked around again. The rain tapped gently on the windows. She saw a coat hanging near the door, a mug left near the sink, his world slowly returning to color. Then she nodded. "All right," she said, "let's try." And they did. It wasn't perfect. Love never is, not the kind that's built instead of found. Elliot still had days when the world pulled at him with too many hands, when old fears stirred awake, whispering that nothing good could last. On those days, he would sit in the chair by the fireplace, watching the flames, silent. And on those days, Nora would press a warm mug into his hand, sit beside him, say nothing, be there. Other days were better, they filled the bookshelves. Cooked meals they both forgot the names of, took walks in the early morning when the fog still clung to the trees like breath. She planted a small herb garden. He built her a shelf for her tea jars. It was the small things that mattered most, the folding of blankets, the brushing of fingertips as they passed one another in the kitchen, the laughter that came not from jokes but from knowing. In the summer, they painted the porch together. By then, the world had rediscovered Elliot Keaton. His name reappeared in headlines, not for billion-dollar ventures or corporate takeovers, but for something quieter. He'd set up a foundation, anonymous at first, that funneled funds into rural hospitals, nurse scholarships, and patient care programs. When the truth eventually surfaced, the media circled, cameras, interviews, requests. He declined everyone. "I'm not the story," he told them once. Then, in a rare exception, he gave a short quote to a small local paper. "I got sick, someone took care of me like I was worth saving. That changed everything." The reporter had asked if the someone had a name. He said, "She does, but it's not mine to give." That night Nora sat beside him on their porch as twilight settled in the trees. He read to her, something slow, poetic, the words brushing the air between them like soft cloth. She leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes closed. "You never went back," she said. "To what?" "The life before." He turned a page because it stopped fitting, like a suit I outgrew. She reached for his hand. "You wear this one better." And they stayed like that as night thickened, stars threading through the sky. No declarations, no promises that hadn't already been lived in. Just the hush of two hearts, once battered, now resting. In time, people forgot the headlines. But somewhere in a house surrounded by trees, a man once lost to the noise of the world found his way back through a single quiet thing. Care. And the woman who gave it, not knowing he was anyone at all, only that he needed it most. That was enough, and it always would be.